right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. Today we welcome back from Football Guys our good buddy Sigmund Bloom. Sig, always good to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Oh, great. Football is what, 6 months away, but we have so much to talk about. And we're learning a lot about every team, their self-assessment, what they think they need to do to go forward. And this is probably the most exciting time to be a Washington fan in decades, maybe 30 years, as they are exactly where they're supposed to be.
Sigmund, before we get into all the things, uh, I asked Lindsay Rhodes this the other day. She didn't know. I'll ask you. Do you know why do we do this tampering, this legal tampering period? Do you know why it was set up and when? Because I don't understand the point.
I don't. I honestly,
No?
it does
All right.
create this strange effect like a grenade. Like the NFL is really strange with the league calendar and post June 1st. Maybe it's just to reward all the guys, gals that understand the cap and understand the rules. It is really strange how procedural the NFL is.
Let's see. Today's pay is tomorrow's overpay. We look at the Bengals and what they've done here. They probably cost themselves 20 million bucks at least, Sig, by not doing it last year. Why do teams continue to do this? Like, I'm thinking about Michael Parsons in Dallas. It's going to cost them 45 million a
Yeah.
year for him now. Like, why haven't teams in the year 2025, why haven't we figured out that you've got to pay up if you want to keep them? Don't wait.
Well, this is hovering over any Commander's conversation. Ownership matters.
Mhm.
Ownership matters. And the way each of the 32 franchises run their shop is going to be based on the ownership and the outlook of ownership. And I think some teams still haven't caught up to the idea that it's in your interest to pay your players instead of being tentative or even begrudging about it. And that is the problem with Dallas, with the Bengals, with other franchises. Now, there are some franchises that are willing to pay, but pay in the wrong areas and try to slap band-aids of money onto problems that have to do with ownership, have to do with culture. But I think with the Bengals, it's just they're cheap. Guys, 20 years ago, back when I was on the road trip circuit, we would see scouts from every team except the Bengals. So, they had Joe Burrow fall into their laps, and I think that's why the Bengals are really going to make a run at this. They have no choice but to do that because I think it would be embarrassing. But I think there's just cheap ownership.
They got both the receivers signed. I think a lot of people feel like that puts them out of the Hendrick spin market, but in actuality, it probably made the cap a little bit better, at least this year.
Right.
Do those moves make you feel like Hendrickson stays?
Well, they apparently put out there on the street that they wanted a first-round pick for Hendrickson. And because he's probably at his peak and not going to get better at this point, maybe start to decline by year 3 or 4 of the new contract he would get, I think that probably scared a few teams off or put a few teams on waiting around. And then the other thing you might wonder about for Hendrickson is, does he want to try to get back to the Super Bowl with these guys now that he's seen that the ownership is committed to keeping Burrow and Higgins and Chase together? So I do think it increases the chances that they'll find a way to get this done. But of course, that also could be put out there just to try to wring out a little bit more draft capital in that potential trade.
Sigmund,
real quick, just to follow up, George.
yeah.
I'm trying to remember the last time a guy like Joe Burrow was so vocal about keeping the group together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that necessarily it surprised you, but is it a good look when the quarterback goes out in front of everybody and says, "Don't be cheap. There's ways to do this." Like he was the cap guru for a second.
Yeah,
what did you make of that?
I think he just filled a vacuum. I think that he had to, and it's not necessarily in his personality to be that kind of guy. But look, the Bengals fan base didn't learn anything. It didn't embarrass the Bengals franchise. If anything, he was speaking for the fan base. He was manifesting what all of these people that invest their heart and soul in the team wanted. So he did a great service for that franchise, and I hope that we can eventually look back and see him as a figure of destiny that brings a championship to Southern Ohio and Northern Kentucky.
Sigmund, do you have any concerns? Like, it was kind of a polarizing topic here on the internet about building the team in a certain way with, 2 wide receivers and a quarterback. Do you have any concerns or anything in that regard? Or do you think, hey, they're the 3 best players on the Bengals. They're 25, 26, 28. That's the way to win in Cincinnati. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, come on. The way you win is making strengths stronger.
I agree.
The way you win is posing questions that the opposition can't answer.
Mhm.
And this team won 9 games last year with a trash defense, a very questionable offensive line, and they had almost every break go against them. And guys, we know that if they had snuck into the bracket on the AFC
Mhm.
side, I mean, if you ran a simulation of the AFC, say 10 times with Cincinnati as a number 6 or number 7 seed, they probably would have made the Super Bowl once or twice because of how
I agree.
difficult it is. So I think that people get way too hung up on, well, a Super Bowl champion hasn't had this percentage of the cap tied up at this position. Because we can look even over the last 25 years, the Baltimore Ravens team that won was built very differently than the Colts team that won. There's not one way to build a champion, but what you do have to, you have to have togetherness, you have to have unity, you have to have everybody pulling in the same direction, organizational clarity, and in this case, keeping the band together and making it so that every week teams have to figure out how to stop this passing attack. That's the only path forward.
Hmm.
I mean, Jamar Chase goes 45, T. Higgins go 30. I was surprised by that. I thought Higgins would at least be asking for 35. I bet you if he hit the market, he'd easily have gotten the 35.
Mm-hmm.
What were you in a day and age where nobody's taking deals? It felt like he gave them a huge one.
Yeah, but look, there's other things. It warms my heart. I brought this up with Chris Godwin because the word about Godwin, he took $22 million a year. The word was that the Patriots were willing to go 26, 27, 28, significantly more, even if you factor in some of the stuff about state income taxes and things like that. And it warmed my heart when players understand, and this is, I think, a life lesson for all of us in some ways, that there's more to valuing things than dollars. There's, again, teams are families. You can see this with Washington and the resurgence of Washington, right? I forget who it was that said that they noticed how the players for Washington last year when they played them, someone that just signed with them,
Will
that
Harris.
right, that they wanted to play together, that they loved playing together. And there's that. I mean, I think as a wide receiver, especially the quarterback you're playing with, I mean, how many times, guys, how much of a cliche is it that the wide receiver, we're already thinking about DK Metcalf and George Pickens, right? Frustrated on the sidelines, sitting by himself, right? So that relationship with Joe Burrow, and also knowing that this is the kind of team that is not going to establish the run. I mean, this is going to run through Joe Burrow, and that means that T. Higgins is going to get his targets. T. Higgins is going to have his day. I think there's a relationship between Chase and Higgins. And the last thing is, come on, whether he made 80 million or 100 million or 120 million on this contract, that number's not going to change his life. His life is going to go the same. Now, going to a poor organization, going to an organization with poor coaching, with a bad quarterback, now that could change his life. That could make him, well, I mean, you're only a professional football player for what, 10, 12 years at the most usually. You want to make the most out of that, and being a Cincinnati Bengal for whatever the dollar amount is the way to do that.
I agree 100%. I think both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, they got to love playing with Joe Burrow, right? Advocating for him, great high volume passer. They're going to have great stats there in Cincinnati as well. So I think it is the family you're talking about, 100%. That being said, Washington, we have a wide receiver that's at last year of his contract. He's going to become a free agent. He has intangibles that make him more important than simply a wide receiver here in DC. Where do you see his contract potentially falling? Do you think Jamar Chase affects his salary amount? Like, do you think Terry McLaurin is going to break the 30 million threshold, maybe surpass DK Metcalf's contract?
He should. I mean, it depends on maybe what the outcome of the season is for Washington, but I think you all have ownership in place there that understands that. Again, when you have your quarterback on a rookie contract, you can splurge or you can pay for past production. I know we always talk about paying for future production, but Terry McLaurin has delivered so much surplus production for this team that there's nothing wrong with, and it sends, I think another thing people don't understand is it sends a message to every other player on the team.
Absolutely.
If you ball out on your rookie contract, if you outperform your contract, that will be recognized. So I thought it was really interesting that going into the offseason, they had Terry McLaurin and Luke McCaffrey under contract at wide receiver, and that was it. And that just shows you how important he is to this team. But also you just have that deep ball chemistry between Daniels and McLaurin. And I don't care how good another receiver would be or what the discount would be. You cannot reproduce that.
Are you at 29? Do you look at another receiver to add to that offense? I mean, the defense kind of is what kept Washington back last year. So it makes sense to be adding more on defense, but at the same time, we're looking at what Cincinnati did, right? And you're thinking, well, we'll go out there and score 35. Is it more important to shore up a defense and trust Jaden Daniels to make everybody else around him better? Or do you say, no, we're going to put together one of the premier offenses in the league for Jaden Daniels in the same offense that they just added a premier left tackle and and Deebo Samuels?
Right. So that's the thing. I think that maybe one of the signings that went under the radar for Washington, that why I think they don't need to add a receiver to get to the answer to your question, is the John Bates signing. Because now with Zach Ertz and John Bates and Ben Sinnott, you can run 2 tight end sets that are very dangerous in the passing game, but very dangerous in the running game too. So you can use the advantage of 11-on-11 football. And remember, they also have a somewhat diverse set of running backs, right? You can go into different modes. If you have Austin Eckler out there, if you have Brian Robinson out there, even Chris Rodriguez, so you can really put a defense on their heels, knowing that, Ben Sinnott, I think, has the speed to rip the seam, and he's a terrific player after the catch. Zach Ertz can sit down in the zone. Zach Ertz can move the chains, and John Bates is just a good all-around tight end. So you don't really see a need for a lot of 3 wide receiver sets for this offense. So I don't think that's an urgency. What I am interested to see is if they are going to run it back with the backfield they had with this running back class, because Brian Robinson didn't seem to add a lot of value on his runs. Austin Eckler, can't overwork him. Rodriguez, I think, showed why he was originally brought in by a previous regime. And I'll be interested if they want to dip into this running back class to add another flavor to that backfield.
Were you surprised about, we had talked about this a little bit last year, and I know people were concerned about Cliff Kingsbury. I'm just curious. Yeah, it's easy to say he did a great job. You can see all the numbers, but were you surprised at his success last year?
Absolutely. And guys, maybe it's just that quarterbacks are like that perfume where it doesn't matter how predictable you are. It doesn't matter how much, because we're going to see this with Chip Kelly with Vegas, right? How much have you updated your approach? How much have you updated your playbook? How much have you learned? And maybe Cliff Kingsbury, when he went to Thailand, I don't know exactly what he learned or what his spiritual journey was like, but perhaps it's just, hey, the same playbook or the same tendencies with Kyler Murray don't work, but when it's Jaden Daniels, it does. And, I don't want to get off into woo-woo land, although that's where my brain lives often. Is Jaden Daniels is a truly transcendental, transformative figure. And the most interesting thing about it to me, I like to say that teams take on the personality of their head coach and their quarterback. And I think you can see Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels in this team in how they compose themselves and how they conduct their business. But the most interesting thing about Jaden Daniels is that he's so placid. He's so emotionally, and for a kid, and I'm saying a kid because I'm 49, I'm allowed to say that. It's almost like someone has shown him the future, and he doesn't have to worry about what's going to happen. And that transmits to everybody, even to the coaches, I think. You all can remember it was in the preseason, I think, when Jaden Daniels already showed that he's going to do his thing.
Audible, right? To Diamond Brown.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't any sense of consternation. There wasn't any sense of you got to learn the order, the chain of command here. In that moment, it was his team. So I think that in some ways, instead of Cliff Kingsbury making things easier for Jaden Daniels made things easier for Cliff Kingsbury.
Sigmund, that's a great segue. So with Jaden Daniels, do you think what is his ceiling? Where do you think he actually sits right now in the NFL landscape? And what do you think he needs to improve on moving forward?
Wow. I mean, there's not a lot for him to improve on going forward. I think just if we can look at the one hiccup in the season last year, it's just staying healthy, just preserving himself. You know, maybe show him tape of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning sometimes when the pressure was there, they would just sit down and just take the sack and live to fight another down. You just don't want to leave him exposed. He's that important to the team that a few extra yards or even a bailing out a drive might not be as important as keeping him fully healthy. Because I think what you saw was, even though he played through his injury, the team really suffered. But you know, where is he headed from here, guys? I don't know, because football quarterback is it's a mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual position as much as it's a physical position, and we know he's got the physical. But what's really surprising and eye-opening was that he has that I call it playing in the eye of the storm. You know, he doesn't seem to be changed by the circumstances of the game. So he could easily, you know, right now the conversation is probably what was it last year? You know, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes had it down, Joe Burrow. You know, he is in that conversation already. So I don't even know how you project a career arc like that when after 1 year we're and guys, the numbers back it up. I forget what the statistic was, like the rookie games without a punt or something like that as a quarterback. And what was the stat, guys? Like he has all of them.
2 or 3 games in a row.
Big number.
Right. Like it had never happened before, and he did it more than once in a season.
Yeah.
So
which is wild, because the punter was our best player for a long time. So
unfortunately.
where I will another time we'll get into fantasy football in more depth. But just off the top of your head, I'm curious where you think Jaden probably goes as far as redraft.
Yeah, I think that it's Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson, and then Jaden Daniels. I think Jaden Daniels is probably going ahead of Jalen Hurts, or right around there. So I think because again, players do get better, they do improve, and you bring in Deebo Samuel. That's an element they didn't have. Like I said, you have now this offense. I don't think that the Washington is going to just run it back. I think that they're emboldened now. You can see by the moves they made. You know, again, adding Laramie Tunsil. This is really exciting because they are as aggressive as you should be when you're in a Super Bowl window with a rookie quarterback.
It's interesting. I am so thankful that we got Jaden Daniels, and that we are not one of the teams, as we were, that is waiting for older quarterbacks to tell us where they'll go. I mean, Sig, how is it that we are still relying on Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, and I don't Daniel Jones, Joe Flacco's in the world? Like, what are we doing here? Please tell me that none of them are going to the Vikings. They've got to run with JJ Redick, right? Or else, why let Sam Darnold go? Because he essentially signed a 1-year deal out in Seattle. I was surprised by that. But yeah, I mean, like the Giants and the Steelers, what are we doing here? What is going on with your Steelers, Sid?
Right. Aaron Rodgers, right? Like everyone's getting sucked into the Aaron Rodgers maelstrom, because what's really interesting about Aaron Rodgers when we look at his career trajectory is the best thing the Packers ever did was moving on from him. Right? Even making the plan to draft Jordan Love, which actually got the last good year of Aaron Rodgers football out of him, the last MVP level. But even moving on from Aaron Rodgers, and along the way, I think it's hilarious that Aaron Rodgers ruined the Broncos without even joining the Broncos. in the pursuit of Aaron Rodgers, they hired Nathaniel Hackett, which I think everyone agrees made them kind of a laughing stock. So Aaron Rodgers has the ability to ruin franchises without even joining them. Giants, Steelers, are you listening? As far as what's going on right now, if you notice, and it's really interesting to me, guys, in this cycle, in this 2025 offseason cycle, I think there's been an awakening, and maybe this has something to do with stuff that's going on in our country right now, of how much agents are orchestrating communications to achieve certain outcomes in the name of certain outcomes. And look, I can tell you, again, harkening back to my days when I was on the draft beat 20 years ago, that agents will just straight up approach you and ask you to publish things for them. And it's just that straightforward. And we've seen even some cases where the agent's listed first in the tweet and last in the tweet and things like that. So people are parsing these messages. And what you're noticing about all the Aaron Rodgers news, I'm making air quotes, is Aaron Rodgers is interested in this. Aaron Rodgers would be willing to do this. Aaron Rodgers would like to do this. Okay. And maybe you were hearing that the Giants are interested in Aaron Rodgers. That's about it. So I think Aaron Rodgers wants to play for the Vikings. And I don't think the Vikings are particularly interested right now. And that's why this is going on for so long. And let's face it, he's a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's one of the best that ever played the game. So the other side of this equation is we just saw, again, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, Tony Romo. We had a real golden age of quarterback play in the aughts into the teens. And some quarterbacks have risen to take those spots, but not enough. And because of that, teams are still desperate. And you have, again, ownership coming in here where I like to say quarterback desperation is a hell of a drug. And, there's some ownership. I think the Giants are a good example. The other thing I'll bring in here is the bias when you know that you're 3 steps out on the plank. So Brian Dable and Joe Shane know that, they want to reset the clock somehow. They want to draft a rookie quarterback, or they want to be competitive this year. And that's why they're willing to do anything they can, whether it's to get Darnold or Rodgers or to move up for Cam Ward or do whatever they're going to have to do. The Steelers, as a Steelers fan, it pains me. I think the Steelers always think they're one move away, and they don't see the big picture that they're playing 20th century football. They're running the franchise in a 20th century way, and they haven't come into the present yet. So that's why they probably still see Aaron Rodgers as someone that can improve the team.
How hot is Tomlin's seat this year?
Oh, I don't think he could ever be.
It'll never get hot, right?
I don't think.
Yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, it's just the steel. Look.
The fan base is kind of. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Go ahead.
No, from what I gather, the fan base is kind of riled up, but I'm not sure if the ownership feel the same way. I feel they want more playoff success, but they're not seeing it with Tomlin. So I'm curious what your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that it's just the nature. How many times have you heard it cited, guys? 3 head coaches.
Yeah, exactly.
What are we looking?
Yeah, whatever it is.
I mean, 3 head coaches. I think now we're talking about 56 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the ironic thing is they wanted Joe Paterno when they got Chuck Noll back in like 67 or 68. That was actually their first target.
Wow.
You talk about alternate histories there. Anyway, I just think that the Steelers really value the Steelers way. And the Steelers way is continuity. And the Steelers way is not being emotional and not reacting to one bad season or one bad game. And while that is wise, and that's a very deliberate and judicious way to proceed, I think we can look at Washington and how striking the changes were with Dan Quinn and Adam Peters, and how ownership gave them the green light to completely reform the team. And it's like the Steelers need a different mentality, but I just don't think it's within the structure of the organization to allow someone to come in and change the way that they do business. And I just think that loyalty, where guys, we could look at that. If we're not measuring in terms of wins and losses, there's still a reason the Steelers are an organization that players want to play for. There's, I can't remember who it was 10 or 15 years ago spoke real freely about the difference going from other organizations to playing for the Steelers. And I think that's still true. It's just not translating to wins and losses in the 21st century NFL.
Not all owners are made the same. And you see like how the Jeffrey Lurie with the Eagles sold off a bunch of his shares. They're doing this. Like it was one thing Dan Snyder could never do because he was only team rich and not pocket rich. You can do a lot of things with I'll do the air quotes cap if you can put cash up on the table. Like how many teams are going to start doing that, and how unfair is it to the guys that don't have the cash in hand?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of baseball bleeding into football, where there's haves and have-nots. And then again, it comes down to, speaking of baseball, I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, of course. And there are some owners, I think Jerry Jones is actually doing this and misdirecting everybody, because there's just some owners that look at the team as a money printing machine, and the wins and losses are more of a personal, emotional thing that doesn't really, for some owners, it just doesn't enter the picture. So I think it's unfair to the fan bases. I think it's unfair whenever you have, and this is the tension at this heart of, fandom of a team. I think team owners are in the leagues are able to take advantage of. We're fans of teams mostly because of connections to our family, connections to our community, connections to our friends, and we associate supporting that team and all the experiences we've had supporting that team with all of these people that we love and these shared experiences we've had. And then teams don't show that they're committed to winning, and it puts fans in this position of almost like an abusive relationship. I keep putting out my heart. I'm vulnerable, and you keep hurting me because you don't really care, or you're using me. So I do think it's unfair to fans. But I think that you're right to say that the gap is going to get larger. And it's not even just cash spending. It's just, as we talked about earlier in the show, teams that understand the system and teams that don't.
Sigmund, to that end, you kind of touched on Jerry Jones. The Cowboys are worth $10 billion. I think the second most lucrative team is $7 billion. So there's a 30% gap in regard to that. What do you think the disconnect is there? Do you think Jerry Jones is frugal? Does he not view the roster construction of the team that well? And I guess kind of a second part of that question, where do you see the Micah Parsons saga potentially going? Because his contract's up next.
Yeah, I think that it's an antagonistic or adversarial relationship between ownership and the players.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all saw the clip of
Dexter Lawrence, right?
Andre. Well, there's the Dexter Lawrence, Micah Parsons thing, which is interesting. But there was, we were talking about the Bengals earlier, and someone was just circulating the clip of Andre Smith whenever he came to camp. And the first time, Hard Knocks was actually covering the Bengals that year. Okay. And Andre Smith was holding out, and then finally they got things worked out. And Andre Smith comes to camp to sign his contract, and there's Mike Brown, and Mike Brown's like, looks like you're out of shape. Looks like you got to get it into shape, So there's this idea of this isn't a happy thing that we just signed our first round pick. Like, I'm frustrated because I just put millions of dollars out to you, and you're not even in shape. And I think that Jerry Jones, Dak Prescott, why did he take so long to sign Dak Prescott? Talk about surplus production, not a fourth round rookie contract. Dak Prescott was an outstanding quarterback, and yet they were reluctant to just pay him what the market value was. And I just think that Jerry Jones doesn't want to pay the players, or maybe it's Steven at this point. Just doesn't want to pay them. And as we've talked about multiple times, the ironic thing is these franchises that are reluctant to pay end up paying more in the end, and at the expense of more flexibility in team building. I think the stat that was circulating around, guys, is they haven't paid more than like $6 million per year for any free agent.
That's all that.
And that doesn't happen by accident. That's a philosophy, and you can see where that philosophy leads.
GMs that need a quarterback in what is a bad year, seemingly to need a quarterback, do you applaud GMs that will shy away from pulling that trigger? I'm thinking like the Titans at one. Like, it'd be so easy just to take Cam Ward there. At the same time, you'd like to think that the person making the decisions isn't taking a player just because we need said position and this is the best we can do this year. I know you don't want to kick the can down the road necessarily, but at what point do you give up being able to draft true blue chip players over showing the fan base, hey, we went out and got a quarterback. Let's go do this thing.
Yeah, I think that we can contrast the Titans and the Browns here, right? Because the Titans, and there's been some misfires that Titans fans, I'm sure, are very prominent in their memory, like Vince Young and Marcus Mariota. So they understand that just because you're at the top of the draft, just because there's a quarterback that they're slotting to you in mock drafts, doesn't mean you have to take that quarterback. And really, Brian Callahan, this is almost like year one for him. Last year was a year where, if anything, you learn which players fit in and which players don't. They did commit some money to some guys. They did get Calvin Ridley. They did improve the secondary, but really that the team that they came out of last year with, I don't think resembles what Brian, and they have a triumvirate there too. Speaking of that, those Vince Young days, which if the triumvirate is working for the Rams, the delegation or committee approach to running a team that's working for the Vikings, it doesn't always work. We'll see if it does with the Titans. But the other side of the equation, as you mentioned, is Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. These guys are very rare players. I think what the Titans, and I'm going to contrast them with the Browns, because what we keep hearing reported of the Browns, and it's so funny, guys, watching this stuff closely, because it's reported that teams are going to do, for lack of a better word, like stupid things or foolish things or irrational things. And depending on the organization, you should take that as a true report. And in the case of the Browns, or this idea that, they're going to try to trade up for one for Ward, and they can't do that. They might take Sanders number 2. And now the Falcons holding on to Kirk Cousins has even more so given them a sense of desperation, because that was potentially one of the plans, Kirk Cousins, and they may still trade for Kirk Cousins. We'll see. So I think the Titans could very easily, if they play this right, trade with the Browns, get some valuable draft capital, and get the player they were going to take at number 1 right away. With Brian Callahan knowing, and I brought this up earlier in the show, it's about job security, that Brian Callahan knows that he has a 2 or 3 year window, that he doesn't have the urgency where the Browns and their ownership maybe does give Kevin Stefanski this idea of like, hey, this year is a really important year for your future. So we'll see if the Titans can take advantage of that.
With the salary, with what the premier positions are getting paid, I'm thinking about, with the cornerback market just getting reset, wide receiver market getting reset, DNs getting reset. How close are we to a point? And we're kind of close there now. I get that. But where teams in the first round just are only going to draft these expensive positions because the juice isn't worth the squeeze on a tight end or a running back unless they are just generational. It feels like you've got to draft those premier positions every year in the first round so that you're not worried about, one, these guys don't get to free agency, and 2, you got to pay up for them in 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know, because I still think the most important thing is hitting on the player. I think the most important thing is a player that's going to add surplus value. And we'll see if eventually the tight end market can get reset. I think this is a tremendous tight end class. We're going to see at least 2 tight ends in the first round this year. And although you're right that I think the 3 positions that are the stepchildren are off-ball linebacker, tight end, and running back. But one of these things don't belong with the others, because the reality is that, Saquon Barkley aside, it's really hard for running backs to add a lot of value or give offenses capabilities that they don't have. There was a time that they said, well, running back by committee isn't going to work because you're telegraphing the play. But I think that we've clearly moved beyond that. Whereas tight end and off-ball linebacker, these are positions that are really more than one position. Right. I mean, linebackers, off-ball linebackers have to cover and they have to play the run. Tight ends have to block and they have to be able to be a weapon in the passing game. So we may see that caught up, but I don't think anybody's looking and saying, well, the Raiders shouldn't have drafted Brock Bowers, right? Yeah. Because he's a tight end. I think that this is one of those situations where if you hit on the player, the position doesn't matter. And I think there's also an argument that on the tail end, that you're going to be able to keep that player, because you're always seeking to sign your first round pick to a second contract, that you can keep that player for less. There's actually an argument that if the league continues to lag behind, and say someone like Tyler Warren, if you know that you're going to be able to sign him to a second contract that is half what Tet McMillan's going to get, well, I think they know who influences the game more, and I think it's probably going to be Tyler Warren.
Sigmund, that's actually a great point as well. So obviously, every year or two, we're seeing a big boost in the salary cap, and we're starting to see like TV revenue coming in, just to kind of just raising the floor in regard to how much money we have, right? I've seen a negative trend. I actually read a couple articles about this. Is so many teams have excess money, right? Walking in with $100 million in salary cap space. And I feel like, from what I understand, it's affecting free agency, right? Like this year, we saw kind of a weaker free agency class because any potential high-end free agent would automatically be signed by their own team. Do you think this is kind of the future of the league moving forward? Do you think that's kind of it's healthy for the league? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's healthy in so much that I would expect we're going to have more continuity. We're going to have less player movement. And it's interesting, again, to see how these things shift because, guys, we can remember a time not that long ago when GMs would say, we don't sign players to extensions that have 2 years left on their deal. We just don't do it. It's if we give it to one, then everyone's going to come and ask, right? We have to uphold these rules, or it's going to be anarchy. But now I think GMs are understanding that signing a player based on the salaries, the top salaries of positions now is going to age well in a year or two. And I think one of the things you saw, and again, here's agents coming in. Most of the deals this year were 3-year deals. So I think players understanding, agents are understanding that you want to be able to structure that second deal so that you can get a third deal when the market is reset. So I do think it's good for player continuity on teams. You're not going to see as much player movement, but I do think it makes it harder, as we've been talking about a few times, for the bad teams to get good. And it's harder for that redistribution of wealth through free agency. We can mention Adam Peters. So because it's very interesting that who was really the special sauce for the 49ers? Was it Adam Peters? I think we're seeing some evidence that maybe it was, because as soon as Adam Peters is gone, they have to tear it down. They are in a situation now where they said, well, the window is closed. So I do think that teams are going to fan bases are going to understand that the GM and their ability to adjust and not be playing by the old rules and be player friendly, going back, tying in the point about the Cowboys. I think that, because I know the Javon Kinlaw signing was panned by a lot of people.
Do you have any thoughts on that in particular, or do you feel one way or the other?
Well, I think that Adam Peters is probably knows Javon Kinlaw's game about as well as anybody in the NFL. And if y'all remember, that was a fork in the road for the team, where maybe a misfire in some ways, because they traded DeForest Buckner and they extended Eric Armstead. And Armstead's now with the Jags, and obviously Kinlaw was supposed to be the pick, right? So let's not pay DeForest Buckner this top end money. Let's just come in and replace him with someone that we can think provide a similar element. So but the idea being that, hey, if Adam Peters said, and again with the excess money, right, because you have a rookie quarterback, rookie contract. If Adam Peters says in some ways it mirrors, Jonathan Allen is gone now. You slide in Javon Kinlaw. I think it's trusting your GM and trusting his player evaluations. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch if they can get something. I mean, the other person, Dan Quinn, right? I mean, it's not saying anything for Robert Saleh, but can Dan Quinn get something out of Kinlaw that nobody on the 49ers staff could? I think Adam Peters thinks so.
You talked about the 49ers breaking it down, and I mean, it's obvious, you can see it. But in my mind, if you're breaking the whole thing down and doing a reboot, why are you paying the quarterback $50 million? It seems counterintuitive.
What's going to be fascinating, guys, is if they're going to do a test and not pay Brock Purdy before the season. And some of this is an experiment to see, can he elevate a middling roster, or are they going to be 6-11 again? And then the next step is, with so many McVay, Shanahan offenses out there, will somebody come to them and give them 2 first-round picks for the right to pay Brock Purdy $55 million a year next offseason. So, we'll see. I think that they fell into Brock Purdy, but I also think they see that Brock Purdy is more a quarterback you win with than you win because. And when they're so cost conscious right now, I think that has to be weighing on them, knowing that once they sign him, that's going to affect how much flexibility they have in building their team.
I'll just say, Sig has the glimmer of Kyle Shanahan faded over the past couple of years. Like, if you go back the past 5 years, everyone says he's the savant of the league. He's brilliant. He's the best offensive play caller in the game. We're starting to see that mimic in offense. We're starting to see a lot of teams do that as well. Does he still have that glimmer in your opinion? Was last year's step back more so injuries, or do you think people are catching up to Kyle Shanahan?
I mean, it's injuries. I don't want to say both and just punt the question, but I mean, certainly, I think a lot of people realize how important Trent Williams is for this team, and Trent Williams and George Kittle. Those are players that allow them to do a lot of the things that they do, and the league has caught up to Kyle Shanahan in so much as the league learns, and a lot of the things that Kyle Shanahan does it's in the DNA of offensive football in the league now, and it's also in the DNA of defensive football because he's been so successful and because so many people from the McVay Shanahan tree are creating offenses now. Counterpoint like Vic Fangio basically, and I think as much as you can see Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay's fingerprints on offensive football, you can see Vic Fangio's fingerprints on defensive football in the NFL. And that's one of the things that's so much fun, guys. That's why we can be sitting here. It's 6 months until there's going to be a football game, and we're hyped up to talk about football because it's ever changing. It's not static. And even bring up Chip Kelly earlier. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect success in the NFL, and that applies to Kyle Shanahan as much as anybody else.
Let's get you out of here on this one, Sigmund. As you mentioned, it is way too early. The draft hadn't even happened, but we're through the first wave. With the moves that the Commanders have made, where do you think this now puts them in the NFC picture?
Oh, I think internally, especially after they beat Detroit, and they have to be saying this is our year. I mean, this is Deebo Samuel's not getting any younger. Laramie Tunsil's not getting any younger. And the Laramie Tunsil trade, I think, is that signal that, much like the Stephon Diggs trade last year was for Houston, ironically, it's this signal to the team, like, we're going for it this year. We're going for it right now. And it's really exciting. And I think what's exciting just from a fan base, from a football fan standpoint, guys, is like I said, watching Dan Quinn, watching Jaden Daniels, watching the way this team is with each other. You want those kinds of teams to win. You want teams that are around unity and love and joy. You want those things to be the buoyant things that make a team rise to the top. And hey, you got 2 games against Philadelphia during the season to try to figure out how to improve from that last result. So this is really, really fun. And there's so many exciting things to look forward to this year. But I think in the NFC, watching how much better Washington can be than last year is probably number one.
I lied. We've got Dave Kluge coming on next week.
Yes.
We're gonna be one of our favorites. We're gonna be talking about the player guide. Tell us a little bit about it, because I know it dropped just like last week, right?
Yeah, they just updated it. The combine numbers, everything. We got a free rookie guide, and at Football Guys, we just love thinking about football and creating stuff to share our love of football. And we have a free rookie guide now, 140 rookies in it, and keeping you updated on everything. My Bloom 100 will come out for people that like to play those IDP fantasy football leagues in April. And we never rest. There's always something in the process. There's always something to think about. And I think for everybody, whether you play fantasy football or not, getting to know this rookie class, it was going to make the draft much more entertaining. And I think of it as like the cliffhanger that just sets up another cliffhanger. The cliffhanger is where are these players going to go? What team is going to decide to take them? Where are they going to take them? And then it just sets up the great story, the great epic story of all of these players' careers. So the rookie guide for free will get you started at Football Guys.
for free. Sigmund, thank you, brother. We always appreciate it. Let's maybe we'll do it again after the draft and get into some fantasy football.
I look forward to it.
All right,
Thanks,
brother.
Dave.
Thank you.